All right. I say, let's begin. I think Professor Ottow is there too. Yes, there she is. Good morning, Professor Ottow also. Right, good morning and welcome everybody. I hope you've all seen the program. I'll go through it quickly, but welcome to the annual meeting of LeidenASA, the Leiden African Studies Assembly. And which is, of course, as you all know, the network of Africanists in Leiden. It is unfortunate. I'm huge. It is unfortunate that we are all back online, as I've said before. This is, but at the same time, seeing myself and my lovely planet guides in the back there again reminds me very much of exactly a year ago when we were doing Africa Knows. And in some ways, the LeidenASA and these annual meetings feel like a continuation of Africa Knows, because Africa Knows was a huge, complicated, big conference online, lots of different discussions. But the central theme was, of course, the knowledge landscape in Africa, what was happening with universities and schools and schooling and education and research throughout the African continent. And one of course, the biggest conclusions and biggest sort of ideas that came up is how dynamic this is, and that there's a huge imperative for us to know more about this, that there's a huge imperative for us to keep talking about knowledge in and around Africa, and also that there's an imperative for us to think about how to collaborate with African partners more, but also differently. And this differently is central because it's about the decolonization, not just of the academy and knowledge, but also of the way that we work together, in a truly equal way. And I think Africa Knows was in itself a great sort of experiment in doing that, but we need to talk more and continue the conversation about how to do this better and how to do this more. So that's what we're doing today. We're continuing this conversation in some ways, and the plan is with a brief opening from Professor Ottow, then a video message from Maria Yazdanbakhsh about as an example of a very successful collaboration that she has been developing over many years. After which we'll have, of course, the panel with Professor Dekker, Dr. Aderokun, Dr. Strava, Dr. Hebier, and Dr. Jensch, who will each introduce themselves, and then whoever else is present can ask questions, and we will try to have an as interactive session as we possibly can on Zoom. We'll do our best to do this. So without further ado, I would like to give Professor Ottow the stage, and I'm very honored that she is willing to open up this conversation for us. Professor Ottow.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning,
yes.
Everybody. But it's really a pleasure to do this as a chair of the executive board of Leiden University, but only because personally I'm really into to the heart of your conversations. And why? Because in my portfolio, it's I have internationalization. So international relations are for me really at the heart of what I'm doing. Although I'm struggling a bit in these COVID times, but as Marleen knows, also Africa is really in the heart of my interest. And we have been talking a lot about that last years in the process of our new strategic plan. So I will say a little bit more about that and explain how things are proceeding. But also in my portfolio is diversity and inclusion. So that brings really things together. And I really hope that I can contribute in one way or another to your beautiful network or the things you are doing with and for Africa. So I think this event is most timely in bringing together our community of African scholars to jointly reflect on the international collaboration and activities with Africa. So Leiden University's engagement with Africa has been at the forefront of recent discussions around the strategic plan, as I said. And Africa will be one of the key focus areas within our regional approach, what we call Approach 2.0. There is a regional policy, but Africa will be explicitly added to that, and we will start talks next year on how to proceed on that issue. So we have the ambition to support and develop university-wide synergies in our engagement with Africa, and to step up our efforts in addressing the SDGs that are at the heart, I think, of many of our collaborative activities in Africa. So we really seek to encourage reflection on the way how to engage with our African partners, but also to ensure that we foster truly equitable collaborations. So I really hope that also today I will hear more about that. And also I really invite you to start discussions with us here at the board to see how you think we should do that. So this means that we need also to be self-critical about how to engage with African partners, but also that Leiden University ensures that it provides a home for African students and scholars in an international community where talent can flourish and creativity is inspired. So a place where inquisitive minds are free to challenge one another in a safe and inclusive environment. For me, that's really very, very important. So that we have diverse perceptives and opinions, but also that we have connections fostered and exchange ideas. So today, I think more than ever, we need the freedom to break down organizational and disciplinary boundaries to do justice to our institutional responsibility of building resilient and sustainable societies. And I think your network might be key to get to that goal. So at the heart of our ambitions lies, as I said, the notion that we seek to further consolidate and strengthen our position as being a real global university. A university that educates both local and international students as global citizens, attracts, retains and develops international talent and thrives on diversity and the richness of connecting international and national perspectives. So a university with global education and research programs that provide the substantive connections to those global challenges. And there's of course a wide range of disciplines related to international relations, institutions, global health, climate change, security issues, and I could go on. But there's, I think, almost ever a relation or link with Africa. So it's the connection between the local, national, European and global that makes Leiden a strong global player, and connecting those for the benefit of all citizens and scientists. So I think the relation between citizens and scientists is really key on our agenda. So in line with this commitment, I think that Leiden is bringing together synergies in its international engagements across its bilateral strategic partnerships. And relations with Africa are a strong feature because at many levels of Leiden's strategic collaborations, you are there. But also within the alliance of LDA, so the Leiden-Delft Erasmus Alliances, Africa is on the agenda. For example, Maria will talk about it later on infectious diseases, combining expertise from its partners, but also on water management, there is an interdisciplinary approach. And I could even add more and more examples. And furthermore, of course, we have the Leiden LDA International Center for Frugal Innovation, which makes key contributions to sustainable and inclusive development. And I myself attended a recent conference on LDA in the Global South, where participants highlighted the importance of an inclusive, co-creational approach with academics from the Global South to shape joint ambitions for the future. And I strongly support that. And I think at that meeting, there was really a lively discussion and really many contributions to see how we can come together and the steps forward. But apart from LDA, there's also Univale. The Univale Alliance we have signed up to a joint vision to create a world in which individual, societal and environmental well-being are in synergy, in which we flourish and prosper together. And within this alliance, the Centers for African Studies at Leiden, Cologne and Birmingham have joined forces with the University of Western Cape to develop a new global classroom concept. And I think that is really wonderful. But also our link with the University of Edinburgh. We have a wide strategic partnership with 2 world-class African study centers. And Leiden recently also accepted the invitation to join the UNA Europa network, where we have also collective efforts in further developing decolonization, equitable collaborations with African partners. So as you can see, it's high on the Leiden agenda. So it's really timely to see each other in this network. But there are a few more words I would like to add, because it's not only that. We also have NIMAR, the Nederlands Instituut Marokko, within our Faculty of Humanities, and the NVIC, the Nederlands-Vlaams Instituut in Cairo, for which Leiden runs the Secretariat, constitute a strong presence already in North Africa. And of course, all of you make key contributions to maintaining and developing partnerships across the African continent through your own research and teaching activities, guest lectures, and visiting professorships abroad. So if you see that whole picture all together, I think we are really in the front of a major step we can take to even intensify everything you're already doing. So the strategic approach to developing further synergies is high on our agenda, and equally we seek to identify bilateral strategic university-wide partnerships with African institutions. So any idea or suggestion from your part, they are very welcome, and I really look forward to further discuss that with you. So I think LeidenASA is well placed to assist and advise the executive board in further exploring this strategic focus, as it has a core purpose to act as a platform for cooperation between Africa specialists of Leiden University and, of course, the specialists from Africa themselves. So I really look forward to a further dialogue with you on the development of our Africa 2.0 strategy in the near future. And to come back to the theme for you today, I would like to emphasize that decolonization is an important topic for us as a civic university. Curiosity for discovery and exploration is what defines us as research institutions. Curiosity is what drives us and motivates us to venture to other parts of the globe. Area studies is undoubtedly one of the unique and most enriching areas of research at Leiden University. And this exploration beyond our own borders has also led us to colonize people in Africa and other regions. That we permitted ourselves to invade and subdue populations in Africa under the guise of exploitation is something we need to critically reflect on. How can we consider our culture and ourselves as having the right to colonize others? This history and legacy has undoubtedly had an impact on our research and our relationship with scholars and institutions on the African continent. But I'm really glad to have an opportunity now to listen to you and to engage with you today about those important questions. And I really hope that we have more answers to come. Thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to your panel.
Yeah, cue the applause. This is awkward in Zoom, but yes, thank you very much. This was, you never know what to expect, but this was wonderful. Thank you indeed for all the openness and the interest also in all of us working together to talk more and to study more and to collaborate more with Africa. Wonderful. Let's immediately go on with an example. And we had two examples, but Andre is unfortunately ill. We hope it's not Corona, but he's not able to talk today. So we will just have Maria, who has sent in a video message, and we'll listen to her explain, of course, her wonderful network that Professor Ottow just referred to already.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Yazdanbakhsh from Leiden University Medical Center. I'm sorry the light is not very good, but it's early in the morning and I'm heading to the airport to go to Tanzania. This is the last thing I'm doing. I'm hoping to send a presentation from Tanzania, but just in case. I was asked to talk about sustainable collaborations, and basically for the last 30 years or more, I've been working and collaborating with institutions in Global South, largely in Indonesia and a number of African countries. And it's really been a very successful set of collaborations. So I just want to talk about that. I think it's really a number of things that ensure that we have these long-term sustained collaborations, which seem to be rather unusual. So what we do is we look at how the immune system, it is very technical, but how our immune system shapes the disease outcome. It could be infectious diseases, it could be non-communicable diseases. The disease patterns are changing worldwide, and by collaborating with Global South, where the immune system is hardly ever studied, we gain a lot of information about the way our immune system has evolved throughout our evolution. And the knowledge can be used for new therapies. Not only for us, it sounds as though we're using all this information just for us, but for vaccine development, vaccines that are needed in a lot of global south, and also for diseases that are now really rampant in urban centers of global south. The diseases such as cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, allergies, asthma are really rampant, are our major cause of death in the capital cities or in highly urbanized centers of the global south. So it's really important to realize that the research has to go both ways, obviously, right? So the interest has to be from both sides. So it's really important that when you are, wanting to study a certain topic in a certain area, that you sit together and really everybody puts their aims on the table. It's not always that, something that I want to do is something that they want to do, but this is it, they want to do sometimes a certain study that I'm not interested in. And there are times where I want to do a study and they're not interested in. And those are the studies that we don't do, basically. So what we do, we try and reach an agreement on what are our scientific interests, and then agree on the way that the project develops. Of course, we have often the money, but it's the attitude of the group in the global north. And as I said, if there is no mutual interest, the project is bound to fail. So friendship is really important, not only with the people who are in the institutions in the global south, but also the whole chain. We ensure that when we work with groups that they are very well connected to the community, that they serve the communities where they are. If we're doing population studies, it's crucial that the community respects the whole medical team or the whole sociology team that sometimes we work together. Social scientists, I mean. So that's another thing for us. Often people go and work, or often, there's a tendency, you identify your partner and you think, great, we're going to work together. And then, there's been examples where these partners are not really well connected to the community. They go and do one study, you get what you want out of the study population, and then you leave. And then, you can't go back to the population. If you want to do longitudinal studies, and it's just not right? So it's so important to identify partners that are really embedded within the communities that they study. So this has really been the case of the most successful studies. I'm not saying that all studies have been successful, but over the years, the ones that have, been proven to be the champion studies are the ones where the whole chain is very respectful of each other and listens to each other. So, this is basically how we've been working. And as I said, I'm going to Tanzania. So I'm just taking a flight to the Kilimanjaro International Airport. I just heard a new COVID variant is, of course, marching ahead from Southern Africa. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the situation is there. The team is a little bit nervous, but very keen to still go. So we're going to the Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center. It's a hospital, it's an academic hospital. And how it all started is that some of the medical team here from Leiden went to work in KCMC and they came back with really good reports of people that are doing a great job, and it might be a good center for our students to also go and see many diseases and gain experience, international experience. And then we had our half minor program where we had Jeremy Apusa, who's standing there from KCMC, who's a medical doctor and came and did our half minor program. And it just was wonderful. You know, he really participated very well and very intelligent, and had a very good feel of, we had a very good feel of this possible collaboration through Jeremy as well as some of the other connections. But Jeremy, because he'd done the half minor, was very keen to do a PhD also. And LUMC Global has been set up recently. I'll go into that if there is time for you. You can go through it. Otherwise, you stop it here. But through LUMC Global, which LUMC has invested more than $1 million in, we have set up collaboration now with KCMC, and Jeremiah is going to do a PhD. And now, to make that PhD and the collaboration successful, we're going as a team, both educators, so people involved in the curriculum of medical biomedical studies, as well as researchers like myself. We're going there with a team of 6 people to really see what is there, see all the departments, talk to the heads of departments, also present ourselves so they know what we do and what type of things, what type of research we're conducting. And then to try and indeed start talking about priorities and how we're going to show our reach our mutual interest for this collaboration. So I'm hoping that when I'm there, that I can send you a recording again of how things are going, maybe send you something with the team and Jeremiah and his team. But in case that fails, then at least you know this is a little, discussion of how we go about our studies. So now I want to, you can stop here if there is no time, but otherwise I want to quickly talk about LUMC Global. This really has been an amazingly good, I think, a wonderful investment that LUMC has done, where we have a steering committee of LUMC Global with various people. The lead is Suze Kraus here. She's doing a great job, where we try and do exchange of students. That's really internationalization of our curriculum, student exchange, but through research. So research is the first entry point of certain places where we concentrate our links with. So we have the ones, we align that with Leiden University, but we've also added a couple certain African countries, because that's not there in the preferred partner countries of Leiden University. So we have collaborations in Brazil, in Indonesia, in Ethiopia, and in Tanzania currently. And that's what we're working very hard to try and establish long-term collaborations. I just want to also say that, through that us having online courses now due to COVID, we've really worked towards working towards providing online courses, and they're in English, so that means that many international students can join, and some of these have been it's been wonderful to have international students join the Leiden, the Dutch students, and some of the discussions become so enriched, of course, when we have views from different parts of the world. That's nothing new, you all know about it, but when you see that in practice, it's a real joy, I have to say. And this was an interesting one, because it's a very, very in-depth kind of course. It is, it's not public health. It's really in-depth immunology and really cutting edge. And this course was opened for international participants. Of course, that's a lot of work also. So you have to have a group of people who are passionate about internationalization are willing to put that extra mile into getting the international student participation, because, you know, anyway, so it makes it more complex, but these, and it was amazing. Yes, indeed, a huge number of international participants. It was a real success, even though it was not, even though it was a very in-depth kind of high-tech course. From participants from many different countries, with lots of really great quotes from students who participated. Of course, the question is, you know, what have they done with it? It would be wonderful to have a follow-up to see what has this brought to them. Has this had an effect on what they're doing right now? Those are things that I think will be good to set up also with LMC Global. But we're working towards a few of these courses. So I hope we'll have more of these online international.
So it ended a little bit abruptly, but otherwise I think it's a bit disorienting now that we're online. It's almost like I can now speak to her like as if she's there, but she's dead. This is odd. In any case, why are we showing you this? Along with, I think, what also Professor Ottow said, I think one of the real strengths of LeidenASA is the wonderful work that everybody is doing already. And I think we're not spending enough time talking about this and highlighting this. And so this is why we wanted to spend quite a bit of this meeting actually talking about how people are doing all of these difficult things, how people are actually interacting and connecting and collaborating with African partners and talking and teaching about Africa. And I think Maria gave a wonderful introduction of like highlighting many themes that are central, I'm sure, to everybody, which a very interesting choice is that for LUMC, it starts with research. I think that's the entry point for collaborating. But then afterwards, of course, after that, it's all about openness and friendship and respect, being respectful and relations to the communities. Very important, the long term, that it's not a one-off game, but it's a repeat game where you build relationships over time, and where you allow for failure also, right? So all of these elements, I think, are very important for us to sort of keep in mind as we move on and perhaps indeed become better at this. Now, to continue in this vein, we have the panelists. I see Rick on the screen. I don't know if that's just me or if maybe that's just me. I don't know. In any case, we now are moving into, yes, there's still time to start this. We are now moving into the panel. And so what we'll do is we have 5 panelists. Professor Marleen Dekker, Dr. Ayo Adedokunle, Dr. Christiana Strava, Dr. Mamadou Hebier, and Dr. Corina Jensch. They have all wonderfully agreed to first present for a few minutes some of their thoughts on the central theme of the panel, and then to answer your questions. So I think from now on, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. And then once the panelists are done speaking, we can also invite some people on the stage, but I'll come back to that. So from now on, whenever you have questions on anything that's been said, please put them in the chat and we'll try to come back to it. And then I would like to invite we'll just go by the order that's on the program as it is. So we'll start with Marleen Dekker. And so Marleen, the floor is yours. And Rick, if you could spotlight her, that would be wonderful. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much, David, and welcome to all of you. It's really exciting to be exchanging like this, although, of course, we would have preferred to see each other face to face, but let's hope next year will open up some new opportunities. I would like to, building a little bit on what Maria has shared with us, I would like to share the experience that the African Study Center has with a program that is called Include. Now, this is not a typical research program, but it's an initiative by the Dutch Foreign Ministry to promote and deepen relations between scientists and policymakers, both in the Netherlands and in Africa. And basically the aim of Include Knowledge Platform is to build a bridge between science and policy, science on the one hand, policy on the other hand, and for researchers to really promote that scientific and policy research is used for policy engagement, with a specific focus on inclusive development in Africa. Rick, could you share the small presentation, or so here what is presented here, sorry, I have to manage my screen. What is presented here is a little outline of what Include is about. I won't have time to go into all the details, but I invite all participants to visit the website in case you're interested in. What I would like to do this morning is to really reflect on the collaboration within Include as a network. Include was established in 2014, and the African Study Center is the lead in a consortium of 3 organizations that is supporting the network. And the knowledge platform is not only about, you know, exchanging scientific outcomes and research findings with policymakers on equality and equity in development, but very much has this equality and equity at, let's say, at the core of its mission. And that means that there is a solid membership base, also in Africa, that the steering group and the governing body of the platform has this equal partnership between Dutch and African stakeholders. Whenever, for example, we are evaluating our activities, there's always African engagement in the evaluation as well. And when developing new research, there is an emphasis on African scholars actually implementing the research. Today, I would like to go back to something that also Maria said about what are the studies or the topics that we are studying, and how important it is for inclusive collaboration to really listen to what African policymakers, African academics want. And in the establishment of Include platform, what was really interesting to find out is that with members, we co-created a so-called knowledge agenda. And from the African participants, a strong interest was placed on research on social protection and the role that social protection or redistribution could play in more inclusive development. When we tabled that discussion, the Dutch ministry was actually very much against this topic. And why was this the case? Back then, so back in 2014, redistribution or social protection didn't really fit in the agenda that the Dutch ministry had on more productive investments and more productive relations. And it went to such an extent that the ministry actually threatened to withdraw their support if we were to continue on this particular topic. But as a platform, we really felt that this was a question that came from our African participants, from our African policymakers, from our African members. And we together developed a strategy on how to table this topic for research and policy engagement. We did that by really looking at what was published scientifically on this particular topic and on how social protection could actually contribute to more inclusive development rather than discourage it. Of course, and again, this re-emphasizes the point that Maria also made, this debate and this gathering of evidence is a long-term engagement. It's not something that is done within a year and then you're final. So it took us quite some time to develop that evidence base, but it's very nice to now realize that with that evidence base, you can also discuss some of the myths that, for example, the Dutch Foreign Ministry has on the relationship between redistribution and inclusive development. And what is very interesting to see is that these days the topic is very much on the agenda and policymakers are pushing it even further, not only in the Netherlands, but also, and increasingly so, also in Africa. So let's stop here and see if there are any questions later on. Just a short recap. The Include program is really about the link between research and policy, listening to what are the needs in Africa in terms of evidence for policy making, and link that to the Dutch policy agenda as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marleen. Include is a wonderful example, but it's also a very nice illustration, I think, of really important points here. And it's very optimistic in the sense that it gives a lot of sort of power to evidence and scientific information. And this is, yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. Let's move to the next speaker immediately. Ayo.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah,
great.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much, David, for this, and good morning, everyone. Good to see everyone online. So today I'll be talking mostly on decolonizing academic education and research. And what I want to do is to really build on what Professor Marleen said, but I would like to step back by doing two things. First, I would like to talk about what is not decolonization briefly, because there's so many misconceptions about the discourse of decolonization. Then I will now talk about what does decolonization mean in theory and practice, how I teach that with my students, and in particular in my personal research. And I'll put the pieces together. So let me start by saying decolonization of higher education is not about replacing white academics with academics of color. I think that is very important. It is more complex and nuanced than that. Secondly, decolonization is not just changing the curriculum. It is more than adding texts by African writers and those from the Global South. It is how knowledge production, distribution, and in particular, the attitudes of academics in this process also matter. And much more importantly, it's good to also point out, and I think Professor Ottow, Professor Marleen, and Professor Maria also pointed this out clearly, that decolonization is not a project over which one group can claim custodianship. It requires collaboration and partnership, both from experts in the Global South and the Global North. And in particular, also here in the Global North, it requires that we have collaboration and discussion with the management, with instructors, and in particular, also with students. Having said that, let me also quickly say a brief remarks before jumping down to the practical part. First, decolonization as a concept has different meanings across different contexts and regions. So what we consider as decolonization in Leiden might be different from Amsterdam. And again, what is decolonization in one part of the world might be different in another part of the world. So it's good to be mindful of that. Secondly, and very important, decolonization is not an event. It's not just after one workshop or one seminar that we begin to say that, okay, we've decolonized the curriculum. No, it's an ongoing process, and it occurs at many levels, at the management level, at the instructor level, as well as the student level. And again, it's good to point out that it requires constant conversation, questioning, and in particular, open dialogue. And I'm happy that we're having this discussion today. Lastly, it's good to point out that there is no one-size-fits-all blueprint for decolonization. It is context specific. In the literature, there are 4 theoretical lanes to look at decolonization. There's no authors that argue for what we call no reform. In this case, there is no need for decolonization. There's those that argue for soft reform, which we call tokenism. These are scholars that argue that, okay, dialogue and provision of access to students of color is very important. And those that also believe in what I call radical reform space. These are scholars that believe that there must be recognition of epistemological injustice, plus representation and distribution. And again, the last scholars are those that believe in what we know as beyond reform. And these are scholars that believe that the system should be utterly disrupted. So as we can see now, there are 4 ways to look, there are 4 approaches to decolonization, but context matters. So what does decolonization actually mean in theory and in practice? in the way I teach my students and in my own personal research. So I see decolonization in 3 ways. And I will just say that briefly, and we can have this conversation during the panel discussion. For me, to decolonize the academy is to recognize the danger of a single story. And what this means is that there is no universal knowledge. So a decolonial approach really acknowledges the fact that knowledge is very subjective. It is not neutral, it is political, and in particular, it is socially constructed. And it is very important to recognize that the danger of one single knowledge or one single narrative is the fact that it has unintended consequences. Again, in the 1980s, when the World Bank implemented a market framework as a development strategy in Africa, where they implemented a structural adjustment program. Instead of bringing about development, that reversed the little development that Africa recorded. So we all know that what works in one context might not work in the other. Again, if we look at the United Nations peace-building effort in Africa, from Democratic Republic of Congo to Sudan and Somalia, while some have succeeded, some have failed woefully. And this also tells us that what works in one context might not work in another. So how do I address the danger of one single narrative in my teaching and research? I think when engaging my students and when I do my writing, I'm only guided by 3 principles. Number 1, I avoid universal claims that lack context. So for me, I think it's good to engage critically with history, and it's good to also engage critically with the context. Secondly, is I constantly probe and practice positionality and critical reflexivity. As an academic of color from Nigeria, from Africa, as a male, and in particular educated in Nigeria, also in the UK and the Netherlands. This body of experience influences the way I see the world. And I try as much as possible to let my students know my stories. And I also invite them to also tell me their stories. Lastly, I also try as much as possible to recognize that epistemic diversity is indispensable. So I see the knowledge from both the global South and the global North as complementary and not just substitute. And I try as much as possible to tell that to my students. Secondly, to decolonize the academy for me is to deconstruct and to reconstruct, and in particular to reframe the curricula and pedagogy beyond the dominant knowledge systems. How do I do this? So there are 3 ways I try to really added some innovation to my teaching with my students. First and foremost is what I called intellectual humility and recognition that students are co-producers of knowledge. And I use different pedagogies to really achieve this. I use problem-based learning. I also use tutorials. I use seminars. I use traditional lecture on rare occasion. And I think this gives my students the ability to take ownership of the learning process. Secondly, I've also critically and carefully diversified my reading list in consultations with my students and colleagues. So my reading list reflects wider, global, and in particular historical perspectives. Beyond the content of material, one thing I've also found to be very useful is that decolonization goes beyond just material. There's a need for human connection. So I create as much as possible, I try as much as possible to create a positive class atmosphere for my students. That is very important. I create a brave and safe space whereby they can have critical discussion without feeling that they need to, that they need to really keep their opinions to themselves. Lastly, for me, to decolonize the academy requires, again, collaboration and partnership. And I think all the 3 speakers before me also mentioned that. So I believe decolonization, again, is not for one particular race. I think it's something that both the academics of colors and white colleagues, the management and students should be involved. So it requires sustained collaboration, discussion, and in particular experimentation. The word experimentation is very key because we are going to make mistakes along the line. We are going to really, there's going to be a bit of conflict in doing this, but the most important thing is the fact that when we stay on track, I think it is very possible. So in practice, I've tried as much as possible to collaborate with academics in Nigeria, where I'm from. There are a few scholars at the University of Lagos, University of Ibadan, and University of Abuja that I've tried as much as possible to collaborate with in my research. And I think that is very important to also learn from experts from the global south. So the key message today is the fact that to decolonize the academy, from my perspective, is to recognize the danger of a single story. And I would like to quote a Nigerian popular writer, Chimamanda Adichie. She says, "The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. That makes one story become the only story." And I think what we want to teach our students is not that there's only one single story out there. There's no one single knowledge. We need to begin to teach them that we need epistemic diversity, and that needs to be included in the curriculum. Thank you so much. And I look forward to engaging with the panelists.
Thank you, Ayo, and thank you for ending on that inspirational note from Chimamanda Adichie, of course. Wonderful talk. Now, I suggest we do one more, Christiana Strava, and then we take a little break to get coffee. So we can let things sink and come up with questions and see what direction we want to go in with the discussion. I've seen some good questions already coming in, but for now, thank you, Ayo and Christiana.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I hope you can hear me all right. My internet has been patchy. I have to say this is an incredibly difficult act to follow. Thank you so much, Ayo. That was really, truly inspiring. So for my part, I didn't prepare any slides, but I wanted to speak also around quite similar dimensions, that is epistemology, methodology, and pedagogy. And I thought I would start by first introducing myself as through my disciplinary affiliation. So I'm an anthropologist by training, and also, you know, in my heart. But I think it's also difficult to be an anthropologist, especially one working as I do in an Institute for Area Studies in a Middle Eastern Studies department, which have both, you know, area studies and anthropology have this very complicated and problematic history. Anthropology also shouldering this very unappealing label as the handmaid of colonialism. And so from the start of my studies, but also as an academic and as somebody who has also worked outside academia in international development projects, I find it really urgent that as practitioners, as students, and as educators, these are important topics that we need to address. And so in my own experience, I have actually come to the study of anthropology, and also my main fieldwork, which has been in North Africa, with also some time spent in West Africa, through actually African literature and mentorship from African scholars at Harvard and at the School of Oriental and African Studies. And from this early experience, I have learned that a lot of the work that we do has to necessarily be radically self-reflexive, and that our positionalities, as I was also stressing, are quite crucial in both reflecting and refracting the power relationships that are inherent in any discussion about decolonization. And so from my own perspective, what it means to talk about decolonization, both within the academy and also outside of it, it means as a first step to acknowledge that there have been historical power structures that have been unequal and that have led to epistemic forms of violence. And to illustrate this just from the point of view of my research briefly, I have worked before doing my PhD looking at marginalized urban communities who are targeted with slum relocation and slum upgrading programs. I have also worked in ministerial and international development programs. And what I have encountered both in policy circles, but also in academic research on the topic, is a form of do-gooderism that is always present. There's always this intent of wanting to improve, of wanting to help others, but that very frequently lacks the sort of reflection on what is it that communities themselves want and what kind of knowledge is and forms of expertise are already there. And this is why I think it's important to look this kind of epistemic violence in the face and acknowledge that maybe the knowledge that comes from particular places isn't always the best knowledge that we should actually give value to. So in the first place, for me, it means to actually reevaluate whose knowledge is given credence, whose knowledge is valued, and whose knowledge is proliferated. And then in the second instance, it means to then reconsider our methodological approaches. So as an anthropologist who's committed to, working from places and being faithful to the history and to the experience of particular places, I think it's crucial that we actually practice more radical forms of collaboration. So I would probably slot into IO's more radical form of decolonization, because I believe that it is long overdue that we actually give over, that we actually amplify, the voices of our collaborators in the field, that we actually modify our models for research and publication, that we modify our models for authorship, and that we take a lot more strides towards, including those that we actually learn from a lot of the time. And finally, from the point of view of pedagogy, because I do teach a lot of our work here in Leiden, depending on where you work and what you do, is quite heavy in terms of teaching, but it's also one of the greatest rewards, is to instill these kinds of critical forms of reflection in our students. So I agree with Io that it's not always simply, removing white authors from your syllabus, because I think sometimes it's very important to engage with these very problematic forefathers and learn not to kind of repeat their mistakes. But I think it's also important to teach students how to actually practice this form of self-reflexivity, to understand that positionality does not translate into lack of objectivity, and that it's important to actually look outside of academia sometimes to understand different perspectives. So in my own teaching, just to, a small view of it, I love to work with fiction and speculative fiction from African authors, and it just, blows the students' minds when they encounter some of these ways of looking at the world and some of the myths and the amazing stories that we have coming from writers across the continent, and pushes them to think laterally and to consider that, especially in the face of really dire crises, which we are already facing, it will be important to find new models for imagining how we live together and how we also produce knowledge together. So I'm going to wrap my part up there, but I look forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Christiana. And another set of great new points, and wonderful that you introduced the power of fiction and art as a source of knowledge. Wonderful. Also, painful, but good that you highlight again that my do-gooder impulse is suspect and I should think about it more. So this is, thank you for that. Let's have a 5-minute break and return at 12, at which point you will also, I've been told, receive a message from NL Alert. There's nothing happening, it's just a test. But when that comes in, we start again. Yeah, so I'll see you then. Welcome back, everybody. And let me give the floor to Dr. Ehrhardt, please.
Hello, good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you. So going straight to the relevant issue, when you talk about international law, you are talking about a discipline which considers itself to be universal. It considers itself to be value neutral, and it considers itself to be speaking to everyone with the same voice at the same with the same tone. And that's create a problem when it comes to discussing decolonizing international law. Why? Because international law has never been colonized. It has never been colonial in its understanding, and it creates a lot of issues. Those people who were colonized were never considered as subject of international law. Their legal knowledge, their legal traditions were never relevant. International law is considered, therefore, to be a European creation. And this was the difficulty that I had to tackle when I started my studies in international law. I chose to write my PhD on a very historical topic, which was the agreements concluded between colonial powers and local political entities. And I'm referring to it because this is where I developed my approach to decoloniality and decolonizing academia. First, I would say research. How do you research a legal order which pretends to be neutral, which pretends to be universal, which pretends to be speaking about everyone at the same time with the same voice? It's a problem. And my approach has been a sociological approach to law. Have completely got away from this idea that law is a doctrinal creation created by academics, because the first thing that this allowed me to do was to send away Grotius, Vattel, and all these European people that are known everywhere as the forefathers of international law. It doesn't make sense, because Grotius in the 16th century Europe could stay here and say the Indians are not subject of international law. He had never seen an Indian. The Indian had never heard about him. How does this make sense? Of course, then when you want to discuss, but how did the relation between the Dutch Indian Company and the Indian go, you will ask, what were the facts on the ground? By looking at the society, by looking at social interactions, you automatically take away much of the colonial concept, approaches, rules, doctrinal creations from the issue. So my approach has really been focusing on practice, law as practice, not law as theory, not law as philosophy, law as practice. By looking at practice, you are able to distinguish really what were the views of the actors, whose view prevailed and why. When was law relevant and when was force the main reasons or the main force behind the social dynamics? So that has been really my approach. And in research also you have another problem, which is the choice of topics. I wrote on a very historical topic, but you can't expect all African scholars to be writing on such topics. In international law, you will not get any position with that topic. You will not get, there is, I think over the last 10 years, I've heard only one advertisement about a job in history of international law. So that's a problem. So the choice of topic is very, very narrow, but it is also important if you want to decolonize academia to look more at what are the topics that we are discussing? What are the topics we are researching? Aren't we just discussing the same things over and over again? How about teaching? As far as teaching is concerned, because I have this historical approach to international law, I always try to show my students what were the origins of the rules. How did the no rules come to be? Who invoked them the first time? What was the reaction of the other actors? Did they agree? Did they challenge it? And in at least in contemporary international law, one element that is not stressed enough, it is the contribution of the global south, of developing countries. Because when they became independent in the 1960s, they tried to rewrite international law. So they changed even not only the process, the content of the rule, they tried to change even the process through which rules are created. And I emphasize that. I really emphasize that. Of course, it then prompts me to show where the revolutionary activity failed and where it succeeded and why. This allows students to understand that the norms are not neutral. They understand that the norms are not as universal as they pretend to be, and they understand that there is room for progress. So sometimes I believe that I'm more an activist than an international lawyer. At least this is not how international law is taught, because my role is really to show what were the rules, where are they coming from, what are the gaps, and how can you fill them. One aspect that I also value are developing countries' approach to law. You take an international law book, you will find a lot of reference to European practice. You will find a lot of reference to European case law, to what a diplomat said 200 years ago. But you will hardly find evidence of what developing countries as a whole were thinking, or individually at that time. So my way is always focusing on their perspective, showing their perspective, whether it succeeded or not. Now, as cooperation is concerned, one may believe that my skepticism about what is written in books mean that I don't value the existing literature, but that's completely the opposite. I believe that before engaging critically with the international law as it is, you have at least to know what is in those, what exists in those books. Otherwise, you will be somewhere up in the air. So one thing that I did, starting from my time in Geneva and now, has been to try to establish a library in Ouagadougou first, and then in Bobo-Dioulasso, 2 universities in Burkina Faso. And I've been just bringing books. So whenever I travel to Burkina Faso, one bag of my, one of my suitcase is full of books. And I've been bringing them steadily, telling people, if you have an old book, I don't care which edition it is, I don't care how big, give it to me and I will find a place for it in a library. And that's a very important point, because the large majority of the books are now available online for European students, for Europe. So it means that the libraries in Europe are full of books that are not very useful. Many people have books, the books that you have here behind me, many of those books are available online. So one thing that I would try to encourage my people to do is just ship them out. You don't need them here, ship them out, bring them to Africa. People will read, people will learn, and from their learning, they will be able to propose their perspective. Because if you don't read, how can you go to a conference and just be talking your mind? At least you have to engage with the existing literature. So that's the thing. And my second project, as far as cooperation is concerned, relates to the African Institute of International Law. The African Institute of International Law was established by my former boss, who was president of the International Court of Justice. And the goal of the Institute is to train African scholars and African practitioners in international law, but not in just the knowledge. Really, knowledge in itself can be pointless if it is not a tool at the service of people. So the goal of the Institute is always to train people in issues of international law that are of particular relevance for Africa. So last week, I will just mention this and probably end here. Last week, we organized a conference on climate change. And we decided to discuss developing countries' perspective. So we invited a scholar from China, and then another one from Brazil, and one from Congo. And the three had to engage and discuss what are developing countries' perspective. You may have noticed that I emphasize more developing countries than African countries. It's also part of the reason is that the only moment when African perspective and views have been able to prevail in international law was when it was part of a group. Yes. And the group of developing countries. So when you are focusing just on one single region, you may not have that knowledge. And this was really interesting because at the end of the webinar, the participants said, yes, we go to a lot of webinars on climate change, but we never get a platform to explain what are our perspectives, what are our proposals, what do we want the system to be. And therefore they called me to try again to organize a conference. Now that will be a whole day conference on climate change and international law. So I believe that by, at least as far as international law is concerned, by considering law as a social practice, already you do a lot of things that will decolonize the field. But if you consider it as purely a doctrinal exercise, then who wrote the literature? Whose book are we reading? If you go today in Africa, your international law book will be either the Pelé and Dallier in French or the Shaw and Evans in English. But then, so decolonization wouldn't make sense if you look at it only from that perspective. But if you take it as a social phenomenon, law as a social phenomenon, then all those who are affected by law participate in it. They challenge it, they adopt it, they nuance it, they breach it when they are unhappy, and that gives you a full view of the phenomenon. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Ehrhardt. Again, wow, very, very, very thoughtful points. Yeah, law as practice indeed as the starting point of turning this around, and also the challenge of, I don't know, seeing if I have to give it to Nigerians. Well, I'll have to think about that. And otherwise, I do bring books, but maybe not the ones I've treasured. Well, we'll see. But thank you very much. Then the last speaker, of course, Corinna Jentsch.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this invitation. My name is Corinna Jentsch. I'm a political scientist at Leiden. And with that, I also wonder what else I have to add coming from this discipline. I've learned so much today, and I thank you very much for organizing this, because I mean, one of the points I also wanted to make is you need to listen to and learn from colleagues about this to get ideas and discuss these things and be in dialogue, as other speakers have already said. So thank you so much. I just prepared a couple of comments on research and on teaching, and I wanted to also make a comment on more administrative matters in terms of hiring, because I've been on a couple of selection committees in the past, and I've seen that it often goes wrong in those respects. So as I already said, I come from a discipline, political science, where kind of the new international, more dominant lines of research are very positivist. So we've been really slow in these conversations to decolonize academia and our research and our teaching. Of course, they have been discussions, but they've, I think they're slower than in other disciplines. And one entry point that has actually had quite a bit of traction is research ethics. So there's been a lot of discussion about making research more transparent and also more participatory and more fair, in a sense of kind of sharing your research findings with the participants, involving local researchers in the research, and what triggered this discussion is being transparent about the research process, but also certain practices that have become really kind of not dominant, but like kind of a fashion in a way in political science, which is behavioral experiments. And there's been and I recently taught an ethics lecture to PhD students, and I heard stories about how they conducted these experiments, and then which generated true rumors about who these researchers, Western researchers coming into the communities actually are. And these students didn't really know what to do with these stories of rumors, because they weren't trained in kind of being mindful about what they are entering, and being mindful that researchers are not only extracting information, they are there, they're intervening, they're changing the communities, changing the participants there. And so I find this, what we've heard in the beginning from the other speakers, really important, this kind of building long-term relationships with the communities, which is not easy, especially for researchers based in Europe and being under travel restrictions. So I haven't been back in Mozambique since 2019, which I really, I find really unfortunate. So this is one entry point, that you can have these discussions in political science. The other thing that I do is to actively cite, I work on Mozambique, so in my book I actively cite Portuguese researchers, and not only established researchers but students. So so I had the luxury, but also the problem that I wrote on something that few other people wrote about. So I was forced to go to the local university and ask who has worked on this, and there were master's students who had written thesis about this. And with wonderful findings and wonderful work. So I actively cite and work with these, and even try to kind of meet some of these again to hear what they were studying. So that's something I do. Another thing I do is, I haven't done for a long time, but want to do again, is to engage more with a more public audience through blogs like Africa as a Country, which is a blog that really critically discusses the Western relationship to African countries, and decolonizing is one of the core goals, I would say, of kind of in the work they are doing, and I'm happy to be able to sometimes contribute to that. For teaching, so I don't teach directly African studies. I teach global security. I teach civil wars. I teach on social movements. And what I've learned from teaching about social movements and civil wars is that these themes are part of contentious politics. And when you study contentious politics, then of course you emphasize how important it is to kind of look at different perspectives on the same topic. So I basically adopt that in my classes. And somebody else has already said before, I think Ayu, it was, how important kind of an inclusive atmosphere in the classroom is, that students can share their views. And I think that's what I've learned is really important when studying social movements. Of course, I try to be very clear from the beginning that we speak about sensitive issues, and every student's opinion is respected. I also work with, I like Christina's approach to film and fiction. I also work a lot with film and fiction to really emphasize that there are different perspectives, and really have students question dominant narratives. I think that's a core thing that I pursue in my teaching, that students really critically question dominant narratives. So even in global security, where it would be very easy to kind of teach global security in a very, like, just following dominant narratives way, but it would also be really boring and wrong, I think. So I've included there different perspectives that students not necessarily get in other classes. So it also makes sense to look at what else is being taught in our political science curriculum at the moment is pretty traditional, I would say, but we've internationalized in terms of students over the past years. So students have actually driven this process of rethinking our curriculum, which I'm really thankful for, because they come from all corners of the world, and they don't see that their experience reflected in the curriculum, and they don't see their experience reflected in the instructors, right? So, and these are two really important points that we need to take up, and we are just at the beginning of the process here in political science. So I do try to kind of teach perspectives that are not necessarily covered in other classes. I also learn from my colleagues who already do that. I have a colleague, Claire Vergerio, who teaches global history, and she, the first 45 minutes, she tells you the standard story of the peace in Westphalia, and then the second 45 minutes she completely takes it apart. It's I would recommend everyone to kind of just visit her lecture. It's really great. So so in that sense, that I find important. I do have to admit I've done this more for gender-related themes so far and teaching feminism than for post-colonial theory or theories related to that. So I like this emphasis, and I think it's really important that it's a process, and we need to kind of continuously talk about this, be engaged in dialogue, and to kind of constantly question and reinvent and recreate our how we do things. Last point, which I already raised. That students are also asking for is, of course, a more diverse set of instructors. And I've sat on selection committees in the past, and there's no process yet that ensures that that applications from minority candidates are equally how do you say? Well, that there's they easily fall off the table a little bit. So and there's not and there are ways, we know that there are ways in which we can ensure that this doesn't happen. And I think Leiden University can do much more in order to kind of train us also in these alternative approaches and ways to ensure that selection committees are really working in an inclusive manner. And then maybe a last point, just because I did this last week, we had a big Afghanistan conference from the Leiden Center for International Relations, and these are also important to organize as inclusive events. And it, of course, it is a lot more work to really look for a balance and for like an inclusive set of speakers, but it's so worth it. And I learned so much from all these people that we invited. So in that sense, I think there's also contribution to be made if you have the opportunity to kind of organize these types of events. So thank you again so much for organizing this. I'm really learning a lot here.
Thank you, Corinna. Thank you for putting hiring on the on at least the agenda to talk and think about. It's indeed super important and awfully complicated, and we're not doing that right yet. That's certainly true. And much more, of course. And just before we go to questions, I want to say to all of you, and in the meantime, maybe Rick can put all of you and spotlighted on the screen. And I'm not saying this just to flatter you, but it is genuinely inspiring, and it's in it to listen to you and to talk with you and to hear the stuff that you're doing. And also the breadth of things that's happening and the thoughtfulness with which all of these things are being designed. And what I like, Corinna, you also emphasize that it's not just decolonization, it's also good scholarship, right? In the same way that Mamadou Evier was saying, it's not just, we're not just doing this to decolonize, we're also doing this because this is the right way to do science and to do scholarship and to think and to build knowledge. So yeah, it is genuinely inspiring. I have a few questions lined up already. If people now want to actually get their faces shown and speak like as if they're present, which they are, you can raise your hand. Under reactions, there's the raise hand button, so feel free to raise your hand. I will start with a question that was posed a while ago about the language. How do you make sure, and this was when Marleen was speaking, so Marleen can be the first to speak, but how do you make sure that people understand each other, who you're trying to connect to each other? Marleen.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is a very important question indeed. And here, what I would like to say, and I think it also links a little bit to what other speakers have been saying, you know, it is quite hard to get your language right at first. So it takes time to get to know each other, to understand each other's way of thinking. And in that sense, what I really appreciate from this panel is this drive to sort of question dominant narratives. And this can be a very forceful debate, but if you allow the time to do it, and allow yourself, either as a teacher or a student or as a researcher and a policymaker, to understand the other's perspective, I think that is really the key here. So it's about commitment to this process, whether we are teachers, whether we are researchers, whether we are engaging, you know, as researchers in a societal arena. And yeah, it really takes time. And maybe just to follow up a little bit, because from the African Study Center's perspective, I've now been mainly talking about include as a program, but of course this debate on colonization, on decolonization and how it plays out in the curriculum, for example, in the master African Studies, but also the research master, as well as the minor. I think what both Corina and Dr. Aya were really sharing is that students really demand these diverse perspectives. And with this demand, I think as lecturers and researchers, we really have to diversify as well. And it's in African studies, that's very much the nature of the discipline. Look at these different perspectives. And as Dr. Aya was saying, of course, there's no one perspective from Africa as well. Africa is diverse in itself with various historical and political experiences.
Can I redirect the question also to Dr. ABA? Because I imagine that you also have some translation issues with international legal scholars and yeah.
Yes, yes. As far as international law is concerned, it's really when you decide to look at practice, you have some difficulty. You really have some difficulties. As far as history was concerned, I like languages and I was able to learn. I spoke French because I'm from Burkina Faso, English, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian. So I learned all those languages just for my PhD thesis. But this tells you the difficulty that there is to write a decolonized story. Because I had to learn all these languages to be able to have access to colonial documents in their original form, not what scholars have told me about the document. So that's really a difficulty. But beside language, there is also one issue that I wanted to flag, which is writings. The fact that academic knowledge production focuses so much on the written knowledge means that we are setting aside a huge part of the oral knowledge. I'm not saying that in Africa or elsewhere there was no written literature. I'm just saying that it was not very common. I'm just saying that there are a lot of people who knew a lot of things, but their knowledge, because it was not in a written form, was somehow dismissed. And probably our generation is the last one which is able to save oral knowledge. And that's one thing that we should be thinking of when thinking about when we think about research project, because someone will have to look at, if you take the 1960s, someone who was born in the 1960s is today 81. So it's better that we start recording these people's knowledge, saving them, archiving them, so that future research will not be completely deprived of orality as a source.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe we move on to the next question, which was posed, I think, at the time that Io was speaking, from Ton, which was about connecting to other African countries, and maybe connect this also to Dr. ABA's point about the importance of maybe developing countries connections, and this has strategic implications too, which we may return to. But like, what do you think about this? Io, you can take it away if you want first, and then anybody else.
Yeah, I think collaboration is very important, but also very challenging as well. So it's much easier said than done. It requires funding. It also requires that you have huge network. So I've got a couple of friends also in South Africa and Ghana. So we also collaborate together. But those are people that I studied with while I was in the UK, and someone also met them during my doctoral training. So with that kind of rich network, I've been able to also leverage on that. But I think it's very challenging. But I think one thing to also put in mind that we also foster much more collaboration with experts in the Global South. And that touched briefly on what Professor Marleen said and Dr. Mamadou, is what I call intellectual humility and recognition that other perspectives matter. I think once we have that intellectual humility, it's much easier to collaborate with experts from the Global South. Beyond intellectual humility, I also think effective listening is key. Some of us, we've done field work in the Global South. Good to know that Corina does research on Mozambique. I'm Nigerian, but I work also on Mozambique. In fact, my doctoral thesis was on Mozambique. So I spent a couple of months in Mozambique. I go to Mozambique regularly. I have contact in Mozambique. So my collaboration is beyond Nigeria, which is my home country. I also collaborate with experts from other parts of Africa. Also beyond Africa as well. Given the fact that I haven't studied in the UK and the US, I'm also fortunate enough to have friends from Latin America, and I also think I also leverage on that. One more point to also point out, I think respectful discussion is key in the decolonization agenda, and I think the kind of discussion we're having today, we don't necessarily need to agree, but there's healthy and respectful disagreement. I think this is key to move the conversation forward.
Thank you. Yeah, Corina.
Yeah, just to add on that, a couple of points. One is that was also mentioned in the chat. What I came across is that researchers, professors at universities, not researchers in research institutes, but professors at universities usually don't have time for additional research that they are not paid for, that they are basically not a consultant for. So they have to teach a lot, and their salaries are ridiculous anyway. So that kind of makes it a little bit difficult, and I wonder what solutions for that are. And the other thing that I've seen colleagues do a lot is when they can hire PhDs for projects, for new grants that they just got. They've really made an effort of, when they study India, then they make an effort to hire an Indian PhD. When they study Nigeria, they make an effort to hire a Nigerian PhD, and I think these are good examples of also establishing these collaborations to have an entry point if you don't have that already.
Yeah, thank you. I also, any other thoughts on this? Otherwise, I have another question in a private chat, maybe for Christiana also, because it's about teaching and you said interesting things about teaching. And this is something I've also recognized, which is that students are struggling with these questions also. And one of the things that some students conclude from all of this is, I don't want to engage with Africa anymore. It's too complicated. I'm too white. I can't do it. I shouldn't do it. I'll go and do something else. I'll go and work for a bank instead. So what do you tell them? And this is like, yeah, Christiana.
That's an excellent question. Well, to preface that, I have to say that actually, in a way, I haven't necessarily been in that position so much, because Institute for Area Studies and the program in Middle East Studies, but also International Studies where I teach, is actually immensely diverse in terms of the student body. And so I think that brings also so much richness to the classroom experience and to the ways in which these conversations can be had among students, but also between kind of educators and students. And here I just want to say what I try to answer in response to this, because people, I think we thankfully live in a generation, in a historical moment where young people just give me so much inspiration from their dedication to tackle a lot of the things that a lot of the problems that they were not responsible for creating, right? Like climate change. And what I always see is that they do get really sensitive about these questions, and they say, well, what right do I have? What right do I have to go and intervene in these debates and to study this? And what I always tell them is that, think about it intersectionally. I think intersectionality is so important to bring into the discussion. Class, race, ethnicity, gender, disability, all of these things are so important. And once you start thinking intersectionally, it also kind of liberates them a little bit from this paralysis of who am I to bring anything to this conversation. And I always say, again, to echo what Ayo just so nicely put, is, be humble, model humility. If you come to these discussions and you want to genuinely engage from a place of humility and a place of openness, I think that is the best way to approach it, and not in this kind of sense of like, well, I know better, I'm going to kind of tell people how they can improve on these things. And there's still students who kind of come with this this kind of perspective, but for the most part they're very open. They have so many different perspectives. They bring together so many different forms of heritage, cultural, historical, ethnic, and it just really makes, for me, it makes teaching really rewarding. But yeah, that's one of the things that I would tell them.
Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts on this question from anyone?
Okay.
Ayo.
Just something quick to really buttress what Christina said. So at LEC, most of my students would love to work in Africa. They love, somewhere else in the world, mostly Latin America and Africa. So one thing I always tell them is to really put their white savior hat down. I always see that clearly, and we love about it in a nuanced way. And I say intellectual humility is key, as Christina pointed out, for cultural awareness and respect. Once you have that mindset, cultural awareness and respect, and you're open to also engage with people over there, I think there's a much more to learn from Africa or elsewhere in the world. And also there's a lot you can actually give intellectually, and sharing your culture and several lessons to be shared with Africa, and also to learn from Africa. So once you leave that, that heart, you remove it and you go with that open-mindedness. I think that is very important.
In that respect, I would advise all these students to go to Nigeria once and then just immerse themselves, and they will be humble in 5 minutes, right? It's very immediate. I don't know about other countries. I haven't had that experience quite to the same extent, but Nigeria really taught me to be humble, in a very deep sense. So we're running out of time, which is unfortunate because there are some interesting conversations on the chat going around on funding and the ways and some more strategic questions. So I recommend that all of you read those again, and if you want, continue talking. We do have to move on. Maybe a last word, like a one-sentence thing, and if you want inspiration, also towards maybe the reflections that Professor Ottow might give about the strategic importance of Africa. If you have any thoughts on this, I think this might be interesting to sort of end on. And we'll go in the same order. So Marleen can go first, and then Marleen.
Yeah, thanks very much. This is, of course, a very important question. With population developments taking place as they are and will develop in the future, I think there's no way we and then as Leiden University can not work with Africa. Many interesting questions are emerging. Also, very interesting questions coming from Africa itself. Questions on strategic partnerships with European universities, with Leiden University. And I think this also links a little bit to what Christiana was saying just now, and what Dr. Ottow has been saying, if we're able to listen, and if we're able to understand how we can collaborate, also taking into account the other perspective, I think that is key for these strategic collaborations.
Thank you, Ayo.
Okay, yeah, I think to echo what Professor Marleen said, I think collaboration with Africa is very important. There's a lot we can learn from Africa. I also think there's a lot Africa can learn from the world. So I think it's more of a synergy.
Thank you, Christiana.
Well, I obviously, have a personal affinity and intellectual commitment to it. So I think there's so much more to be done in terms of collaborations, but also South-South collaborations, like Ayo was saying. So I'm really looking forward to this in terms of PhD training, like Corina mentioned. So I'm very hopeful that there's so much work to be done, but it's important work and it's meaningful work, and I'm really happy to be part of this group of people that are clearly committed to it. So I'm excited for what's to come.
Thank you, Dr. Ehrhardt.
As far as collaboration with Africa is concerned, I will really say, let's get back to the books. Let's get back to the books and make sure that literature, knowledge is available there so that you can collaborate with people that are also get the chance to read those books. Because it's true, Africa is the future, but as an African, I get worried. I'm from Burkina Faso, and if you see the terrorist threats there, I really want collaboration in establishing states first, before thinking about a collaboration in at the purely knowledge level. So let's make sure that the capacity is there and then push forward. And for me, as far as academia is concerned, book sales are the first step. Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me, I have this dream of like an African liberal arts college in this way, right? Okay, sorry, I shouldn't intervene. Corina, final words.
Well, I echo what everyone else has said, of course, but maybe something to emphasize would be enabling exchanges, right? I mean, when people meet, then wonderful things can happen. So to make it really cheesy here, but I think that's true. And like both ways, not only Western or Leiden researchers to African countries, but also back, and not only researchers, but also students. So in that sense, I think exchanges would be wonderful, but they need financial support. So it's an expensive program.
Yeah, it's the season to be cheesy, Corina. It's fine. When people meet, wonderful things happen. I couldn't agree more. So on that note, thank you to the panelists. Thank you very much. And keep talking. Also respond to the people in the chat if you can. And we will turn to Professor Ottow for final reflections for now, at least.
Yes, well, final reflections. I have so many because I found it very, very interesting. And of course, there's only a short period of time to do so. So it's enough also to continue the discussion and the exchange of ideas for the future. So maybe just summarize a few of the reflections I have, and I learned a lot. But I think that in essence, we all agree that's about building relationships. That's what I heard a lot. And the story is incomplete if we do not have an inclusive collaboration. So for me, that's the key message we have to bring or to cross over to everybody we are talking to. But it can also be the core message of our network here at Leiden University. So for me, there's this danger of a single story I noted for myself, and listening to you, I think we have many perspectives coming together in this network, and I think that makes sure that we do not have a one-sided view on what should be done. So for me, the rethinking of many of the concepts discussing today, I think is really important. And it may be either on international law. I'm a lawyer myself. I'm also a European and international lawyer, but I really like the concept of rethinking of the international law. So Mamadou, I would love to talking more with you. So there are many approaches on how to do that. And I think for us, it's also important to see how we can not only bring the expertise together, but also institutionalize it. So I think that one of the ideas of enabling exchanges, for example, or getting more books to establish connections with universities all over Africa. So I think that's something we would love to discuss further, and also to see how we can arrange some financial support for that. And last week I was in Brussels, and also Brussels is really thinking about more programs for their relationship with African continent. So I think also for us as Leiden University, there are really many possibilities, and we really need to step into it to see how we can really contribute to those systems established by the European Commission. So I would love to talk also to Marleen on this and to see how we can involve Leiden University. So that's maybe an idea I had in mind when I was listening to you. But to summarize it as such, I think that I've noted also be humble and open. And I think that's what I feel really at the table here at this very moment in this workshop. I'm at least personally will be humble. I will listen to you, and hopefully I can contribute to the really beautiful future of this network. And I saw in the chat that Leiden has to be ahead of everybody because we have so much knowledge and expertise here. So I'll do my best to make sure that we remain ahead of everybody. But I think for the next coming years, the strategic plan gives us plenty of opportunities to do so. So I invite you all to think about it. But thank you so much for your ideas and reflections and wisdom. And I hope to see you in the near future in person. But at least let's talk and move on to do even more good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ottow. Collaboration indeed, and humility, and stepping into opportunities that are there. I think that's a really good way to think about it. That's the way I think I also feel. And it's an opportunity, first of all, because we have this network. So it's also an internal thing, right? We have so many things. We're doing so many things. There's much more to capitalize on in that sense, even if it's just as we're doing today, learning from each other, but then also external opportunities, either higher up in Leiden or in the EU. So this is yeah, well noted, and I think it's a very, very nice way to think about it. Now, on that front, let me end practically. We've heard enough wonderful, inspiring things. So I will just highlight a few things that LeidenASA is already planning to do. And let me start by saying we are all we are a network, right? So if you have ideas about what LeidenASA can do come to Mike and me, and then we will see what we can do. Now, what we are planning, first of all, is to work on the visibility of us as a network, but also of all of your projects. So we're working on a website. We're thinking about ways to showcase the different things that people are doing to get more of this cross-fertilization that's happening today happen more structurally. So that's number one. Number two is we're establishing or re-establishing a steering committee for the LeidenASA network to really make it owned by the entire university. So we'll have representatives from all the faculties, and as a steering committee, that will be sort of the central management of the network and set the strategic direction. So that's almost everybody has confirmed their participation in this. So very shortly you will be told who these wonderful people are. And I think the point for next year in particular is to redefine the network and to think about how to move forward. Because as everybody is saying, all of this is a long-term thing. None of this is quick fixes or fast moving. So we'll take our time next year to think about what the best directions are to make the best use of this network and to make the most of it for both Leiden and for all of us. And then thirdly, like 2 practical points. We are planning, after a little delay, to do an edited volume from Africa Knows from the conference last year. Because again, let me emphasize that Ton is also here, or at least he was here. I can't see him now, but I think he's still here. This is a continuation of that conversation. So there will be an edited volume from that conference, and if you're interested, do let us know. And then finally, we've started, and this does reverberate with something Dr. David said, and also Dr. Straba said about different ways of communicating knowledge and different and documenting other types of knowledge. We're starting a podcast, Africa Knows, which is going to be a series of interviews with African scholars and people who know things. So it's not just scientists. At first, it'll be scholars and people from academia, but I'm also very excited to talk to people who are just knowledgeable, who are repositories of knowledge, maybe the 85-year-old or the 81-year-old that somebody was talking about. And it's a little bit different in the sense that it's meant to be a collaborative platform where we have different hosts coming in from different parts of the continent. And right now we're doing, yes, Professor Ottow, thank you. Thank you for coming. Right now we're focused on Nigeria because that's where the current hosts know best, but we're very eager to expand. We're very eager to expand. So if you have ideas, do contact us, and we're happy to collaborate. So those are practical things we're doing now: visibility, the steering committee, and the publications, both written and oral. But any good ideas are always welcome. So with that, and yeah, Corinna's big in my screen, so let me go back to the cheesiness. When we meet, wonderful things happen. Thank you, Corinna, for that one. So let's keep meeting. And unless anybody has any final words to share, I wish you all a wonderful Monday. And if I don't see you again, thank you for coming, and a wonderful end of this crazy year yet again.